I wasn't supposed to be home that early. It was a fluke, really, a broken conveyor belt at the factory. Management told us to clock out and head home while the maintenance team sorted it out. It wasn't even noon. I figured I'd surprise Marcy. Maybe grab lunch together before the boys came home from school. Walking through the door, the house was quieter than I expected. Usually, Marcy was either chatting on the phone with her sister or humming while folding laundry. That day, nothing. The only sound was a faint creak upstairs. I didn't think much of it. I called out, "Marcy? You home?" No answer. As I climbed the stairs, my stomach tightened for reasons I couldn't explain. When I reached the top, I noticed our bedroom door was half open. I could hear muffled voices and laughter, hers, unmistakably, and a man's voice I didn't recognize. My heart was pounding, my mind racing to make sense of it. I pushed the door open. There they were. Marcy and Tony of all people. He owned the big dealership in town, the kind of guy who wore cologne you could smell from 5 feet away. They didn't even notice me at first. But when they did, Marcy gasped and scrambled to pull the blanket over herself. Tony just sat there, his smirk dissolving into a blank stare. "What the hell is this?" My voice cracked, caught between disbelief and anger. Marcy stammered, "Danny, it's not what it looks like." Not what it looks like. I felt my fists clenching. "You're in our bed, Marcy." Tony finally stood up, calm as if this wasn't the worst moment of my life. "Hey man, let's talk about this." I lost it. I lunged at him, landing a punch on his jaw. But Tony was bigger than me, and before I knew it, he had me pinned against the wall. My chest was heaving, my vision blurry from the adrenaline and shame. Marcy screamed for him to stop, but he didn't until I was on the floor, gasping for air. When Tony left, Marcy didn't rush to me. She didn't say sorry. She just stood there, clutching the blanket, looking at me like I was the intruder. That was the moment I realized everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. I sat there on the bedroom floor, my chest still aching where Tony had slammed me into the wall. Marcy was pacing back and forth, muttering something under her breath. My mind was spinning, trying to catch up to what had just happened. Finally, I managed to push myself up. "Why, Marcy? Why would you do this to me? To us?" She stopped and looked at me, her face pale but her eyes cold. "You want the truth, Danny? Fine. I'm done pretending. Tony and I have been seeing each other for months." Her words hit like a brick to the chest. "Months? You're telling me this wasn't just a mistake? This is real." She crossed her arms. "Yes, it's real. And before you start with the how could you, let me tell you something, you're boring, Danny. You've always been boring. You work, you come home, and that's it. There's no excitement. No passion. Tony, he makes me feel alive." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I've worked my ass off for this family, Marcy. For you. For the boys. Everything I do is for you all. That's the problem," she snapped. "You've turned into a robot. A provider, sure, but nothing else. Tony gives me what I need. He's exciting, successful, and honestly, Danny, he's better in ways I didn't even know I was missing." Her words cut deeper than any punch Tony had thrown. I felt my legs give out, and I sat down on the bed, the same bed she'd just been in with him. "So what now?" I asked quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you expect me to do?" She shrugged, as if this was some everyday disagreement. "You're still their father, Danny. You can still be part of their lives. But Tony is going to be in mine, whether you like it or not." "You can't be serious," I said, my voice breaking. "Oh, I'm serious," she said, her tone sharp. "And if you think about making this public, if you try to divorce me and play the victim, I'll ruin you. I'll tell everyone how pathetic you are. I'll make sure the boys see you for what you really are, a weak, spineless man who couldn't keep his wife happy." Her words were venom, each one hitting its mark. I wanted to scream, to cry, to break something, but instead I just sat there, staring at the woman I thought I knew. "Get out," I said finally, my voice shaking. "Excuse me." "Get out, Marcy. I can't look at you right now." She smirked, like she'd won some kind of twisted game. "Fine. But don't think this is over." With that she walked out, leaving me alone in the wreckage of what used to be my life. The hours after Marcy left felt like a dream, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I sat there in that bedroom, staring at nothing, feeling everything. My mind was stuck on the scene I just lived through, Tony smirking, Marcy unapologetic, and the way she threw my worth as a husband and father back in my face like it meant nothing. Eventually, I got up. The silence in the house was suffocating. I stumbled downstairs, my legs shaky like I'd run a marathon. On the kitchen counter, I saw the boys' lunchboxes still sitting there, waiting for me to pack them like I did every morning. It hit me then, how normal that day had started, how quickly everything had fallen apart. My phone buzzed. For a split second, I hoped it was Marcy, maybe calling to say she regretted everything. But it wasn't her. It was my coworker Joe, texting to ask if I wanted to grab a beer after work. I ignored it. I couldn't even think about facing anyone right now. Then another thought hit me, the boys. They'd be home soon. How was I supposed to explain this? Hey kids, your mom's not here because she's been sleeping with Tony from the car dealership. The idea of breaking their hearts tore me up inside. I heard the bus pull up outside. My chest tightened. The door opened, and there they were, Jason 9 and Benny 6, bounding in with their backpacks, talking a mile a minute about some project they did in school. Dad. Jason said, dropping his bag on the floor. Why are you home early? I forced a smile. Factory shut down for the day. How was school? Boring, he said, heading to the fridge. Benny tugged on my arm. Where's Mommy? The question hit me like a freight train. My throat felt dry. She went out for a bit. She'll be back later. He nodded, satisfied with my weak answer, and ran off to play with his Legos. Jason joined him a minute later, leaving me standing there, feeling like a fraud. I knew I couldn't keep this from them forever. At some point, they'd notice the tension, the absence. But how do you explain something like this to kids? How do you tell them their mom isn't the person they think she is? I sat down at the table, my head in my hands, trying to figure out how to hold it together for their sake. For the next few hours, I went through the motions. I helped Jason with his math homework, made Benny a peanut butter sandwich when he got hungry, and listened to them argue about which superhero would win in a fight. For a little while, it felt normal. But the moment they were in bed, the weight of everything came crashing down again. I sat in the dark living room, staring at the family photo on the wall. We'd taken it last Christmas, all of us smiling in matching sweaters. Now it felt like a cruel joke. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying Marcy's words, her threats, her cold indifference. How had I missed it? How long had she been this person? I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was clear, my life would never be the same. The next day, I dragged myself through the motions, getting the boys ready for school while trying to hide the storm brewing inside me. Every time they asked about Marcy, I told them she had some errands to run. I felt guilty lying, but the truth wasn't something they were ready to hear. Once they were gone, the house felt unbearably quiet again. I tried cleaning up, hoping it would distract me, but everything I touched seemed to remind me of her. The coffee mug she always used, the blanket she curled up with on the couch, it was like she was still there, haunting the place. Around noon, the door opened. I froze, my heart pounding. It was Marcy. She walked in like nothing had happened, her hair freshly done, wearing the kind of outfit she only wore when she was out to impress someone. She set her purse down on the counter and looked at me, her expression unreadable. "You're back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course I'm back. This is my house too," she said casually, like we hadn't had the most devastating fight of our lives the day before. I stared at her, stunned by her audacity. "Are you seriously just going to walk in here and act like everything's fine?" She sighed, rolling her eyes. "Danny, we need to talk. Like adults." "Oh, now you want to talk? After everything you said yesterday?" She crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. "Look, I said some things I shouldn't have. But this doesn't have to be as dramatic as you're making it." Dramatic. I stood up, my fists clenching. "Marcy, you cheated on me. You brought another man into our home, into our bed. How am I supposed to act?" She shrugged. "I made a mistake. But I'm not going to let you turn this into some soap opera where I'm the villain and you're the perfect saint." Her indifference was like gasoline on a fire. "This isn't just a mistake, Marcy. You didn't trip and fall into his bed. This was planned." Repeated. "Okay, fine," she snapped. "Yes, I cheated. Yes, I've been seeing Tony. But do you think this is all my fault? You've been so checked out, Danny. You think paying the bills and fixing the car is enough? You haven't made me feel wanted in years. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So it's my fault now? I've done everything for you, for this family. Everything but pay attention to me, she shot back. We stared at each other, the tension so thick it felt like the walls were closing in. Finally, I broke the silence. What do you want, Marcy? Why are you even here? Her face softened slightly, but her tone stayed firm. I want to figure out how we're going to move forward. For the boys' sake. I don't want them caught in the middle of this. I laughed bitterly. You should have thought about that before you invited Tony into their lives. She rolled her eyes again, clearly done with my anger. I'm not leaving, Danny. This is my home too, and I'm staying here. If you don't like it, you can leave. Her words stunned me into silence. You've got until the boys come home to decide how you want to handle this, she said, grabbing her purse. I'm going out. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. And just like that, she was gone again, leaving me in the wreckage she'd created. Spent the rest of the day sitting in the kitchen, staring at the clock. The boys would be home in a few hours, and I still had no idea what I was going to say to them, or how I was supposed to coexist under the same roof with Marcy after what she'd done. Her casual attitude, the way she dismissed everything like it was just a minor hiccup, made my blood boil. How could she act like she was still entitled to this house, this life, after shattering it? Around 3 p.m., the bus pulled up, and the boys came bounding through the door, their energy instantly filling the house. Daddy, is Mommy back yet? Benny asked, his big blue eyes full of curiosity. I forced a smile. Yeah, she'll be back soon. How was school? Good. We got to paint today, Benny said, holding up a messy, colorful piece of paper. Jason, always the quieter one, dropped his bag by the door and headed straight to the fridge. Can we have pizza tonight? He asked over his shoulder. Sure, I said, trying to sound normal. The sound of Marcy's car pulling into the driveway made my stomach turn. The boys ran to the window, shouting, Mommy's home. She walked in with shopping bags, her face lighting up as she saw the kids. Hi, my babies, she said, setting the bags down to hug them. For a moment, it was like nothing had happened. She was the doting mom, asking about their day, complimenting Benny's painting, and laughing at Jason's joke about his math teacher. But then her eyes met mine, and the warmth drained from her face. Danny, can I talk to you in the other room? I hesitated, not wanting to leave the boys, but I nodded. Jason, keep an eye on your brother. In the living room, Marcy closed the door behind us. I meant what I said earlier, she began, crossing her arms. I'm staying here. We need to figure out how this is going to work. I laughed bitterly. You expect me to live here with you, after what you've done? Danny, be realistic, she said, her tone patronizing. We can't just uproot everything for the boys. They need stability. You want to be a good father, don't you? Her words stung, but I refused to let her guilt trip me. Being a good father doesn't mean letting you walk all over me, Marcy. I'm not asking for a fight, she said, sighing. I'm asking for a compromise. We can live here, together but separate. You can have your space, I'll have mine. The boys don't need to know anything's wrong. I stared at her, trying to process the audacity of her proposal. You want to play house while you keep seeing Tony on the side? Is that it? Her eyes narrowed. Tony isn't going anywhere, Danny. I've made my choice. But this isn't about him, it's about our family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're unbelievable, I muttered. Think about it, she said, brushing past me. But don't take too long. The boys deserve an answer. She walked out, leaving me standing there, fists clenched and heart pounding. The rest of the evening was excruciating. I kept my interactions with Marcy to a minimum, focusing all my energy on the boys. They didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary, but every time I saw them laugh or talk to Marcy like nothing was wrong, my chest tightened. How could she stand there, smiling and acting like the perfect mom, while tearing our family apart behind closed doors? After the boys were asleep, I sat on the couch, staring at the TV without really watching it. Marcy was upstairs, probably texting Tony or whatever else she did when she wasn't destroying lives. Her words earlier kept replaying in my head. We can live here, together but separate. The boys don't need to know anything's wrong. She thought she could control this, control me. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized she wasn't the one holding all the cards. I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to let her dictate how this played out. The next day, I called in sick to work. I needed time to think, to figure out what my next move would be. I couldn't just sit back and let her get away with this. First, I made a list of priorities. Protect the boys. Protect my financial stability. Make sure Marcy faced some kind of consequences. I started researching divorce lawyers online, trying to get a sense of my options. I didn't know much about divorce, but I knew it wouldn't be simple, especially with kids involved. The idea of a custody battle terrified me, but the thought of staying in this mess was even worse. By midday, I had found a few lawyers with good reviews and left messages for consultations. Just making those calls felt like a small step toward taking back control. Later, while the boys were at school and Marcy was out again, I went through some of her things. I hated to stoop that low, but I needed information, proof of her affair, anything that could help me in court if it came to that. I didn't find much at first, just receipts for expensive dinners and gifts I didn't recognize. But then I found her old phone in the back of a drawer. It was dead, but I plugged it in and waited. When it finally turned on, my heart raced. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly, but I started going through her messages, photos, and emails. And there it was, a string of texts with Tony, starting months ago. They were worse than I imagined. Flirty messages, photos of them together, plans for secret meetups. It was all there in black and white, undeniable proof of what she'd been doing behind my back. But what really made my stomach turn was one particular message. Don't worry about Danny. He's harmless. He'll never do anything about it. I stared at the screen, anger boiling in my chest. She thought I was harmless. Powerless. But she was wrong. That text from Marcy to Tony, he's harmless. He'll never do anything about it, played in my mind like a broken record. Every time I thought about it, a new layer of anger peeled away, exposing something deeper, determination. She thought I'd roll over and take it. She thought I wouldn't fight back. That lit a fire in me. The following morning, I had a consultation with a lawyer named Mark. His office was in the next town over, far enough that I didn't have to worry about anyone recognizing me. Mark was an older guy, sharp and to the point, the kind of person who didn't sugarcoat things. After I explained the situation, he leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped on the desk. It's not going to be easy, he said. But if what you're saying is true, we've got options. The affair gives US leverage, especially if you can prove it impacted the marriage. You'll want to start documenting everything. Texts, emails, anything that shows her infidelity and behavior. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. What about custody? He raised an eyebrow. That depends. Are you planning to stay in the house? I hesitated. She's refusing to leave. Mark sighed. That's common. If you can prove her affair and show it's creating a toxic environment for the kids, we might be able to file for temporary custody. But it'll take time. In the meantime, I suggest playing it cool. Don't confront her or make any sudden moves. The calmer you stay, the stronger your case will be. It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was something. I left his office feeling like I had a roadmap, even if the road ahead looked rough. When I got home, Marcy was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee like it was just another day. You've been out a lot lately, she said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. Had some errands to run, I replied, keeping my voice even. She smirked. You're not trying to pull anything, are you, Danny? I stared at her for a long moment, forcing myself to stay calm. I'm just trying to figure out what's best for the boys. Her smirk faded, replaced by a slight frown. Good. Because whatever happens, we need to keep things civil. For their sake. Civil, that word tasted bitter in my mouth. But I nodded, keeping up the act. Over the next few days, I started gathering everything I could. I made copies of the texts between her and Tony. I took photos of receipts and other documents that hinted at her double life. I even started keeping a journal, writing down every interaction we had, every time she came home late, every comment she made about living separate lives. It felt sneaky, underhanded even, but Mark was clear, I needed evidence. Meanwhile, I kept up the facade for the boys. We had movie nights, played board games, and went to the park like nothing was wrong. It killed me inside, but their smiles made it worth it. One night, after the boys were in bed, Marcy cornered me in the living room. We need to talk, she said, sitting down across from me. I set down my book, bracing myself. What about? This arrangement, she said, gesturing vaguely around the house. It's not sustainable. We need to come to an agreement. I tilted my head. What kind of agreement? She hesitated, like she was choosing her words carefully. I think we should divide things up. You take care of the boys during the week, I'll take weekends. That way, we're not stepping on each other's toes. I almost laughed. She was already trying to cut me out of the picture, even before anything was settled. I'll think about it, I said evenly. She looked frustrated, like she expected me to just agree. Danny, this doesn't have to be hard. I'm trying to make this easier for everyone. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. Easier for you, you mean? Her expression flickered, just for a second, before she stood up. Fine. Be stubborn. But don't say I didn't try. She stormed upstairs, and I sat there, my fists clenched, reminding myself of Mark's advice. Stay calm. Play the long game. And that's exactly what I planned to do. A week into this nightmare, I got a surprising call from someone I hadn't heard from in months. Mark from the factory. He wasn't just a coworker, he was one of the few people I considered a friend. Hey Danny, he said, his voice hesitant. I heard about what's been going on. You okay? For a second, I was speechless. What do you mean? He sighed. Small town man. People talk. Someone saw Marcy with Tony. Words getting around. I felt a rush of embarrassment, anger, and something close to relief. At least I wasn't completely alone in this. Yeah, I said finally. It's true. Damn, Mark muttered. That's rough. Listen, if you ever need to talk, or I don't know, a distraction, give me a call. I mean it. Thanks, Mark, I said, genuinely grateful. And Danny, he added, don't let her push you around. You're a good guy. Don't forget that. After he hung up, I sat there for a long time, thinking about what he'd said. I wasn't the type to air my dirty laundry, but knowing someone had my back gave me a spark of hope. That evening, Marcy came home late again. I didn't ask where she'd been. I didn't have to. But as she walked past me without a word, I felt the weight of her indifference crushing me. I thought about Mark's call, his encouragement, and something shifted inside me. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me anymore. The next morning, I got up early and made a plan. I called a locksmith to change the locks on the house. Mark had mentioned knowing a guy who could do it discreetly, and within a few hours, it was done. When Marcy came home that afternoon, she found herself locked out. What the hell is this? She demanded, banging on the door. I opened it, standing just inside. You don't live here anymore, Marcy. Her eyes widened, then narrowed in anger. You can't do this. This is my house too. Not anymore, I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. I talked to a lawyer. You want to fight me on this, fine. But you're not walking in here like nothing's happened. She stepped closer, her face inches from mine. You're going to regret this, Danny. Maybe, I said, meeting her gaze. But at least I'll finally be able to look at myself in the mirror. For a moment, she looked stunned, like she didn't recognize me. Then she turned on her heel and stormed off, muttering something I couldn't make out. That night, the house felt different. Quieter. Lighter, even. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The peace didn't last long. The next morning, my phone rang while I was getting the boys ready for school. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something told me to answer. Hello. Mr. Miller, this is Officer Jennings with the County Sheriff's Department. We've had a complaint filed against you. Would you be available to come in for a conversation? My stomach dropped. A complaint? About what? Your wife has alleged that you've been locking her out of the home and creating a hostile environment. It's a civil matter for now, but we'll need to document your side of things. I couldn't believe it. Marcy had wasted no time turning this into a power play. Of course, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'll come in this afternoon. After I hung up, I stared at the boys as they ate their cereal, laughing about some inside joke I didn't catch. How much longer could I shield them from this mess? At the station, I sat across from Officer Jennings, explaining everything, the affair, Marcy's refusal to leave, and her threats to ruin me if I exposed her. He nodded, jotting down notes. It sounds like a complicated situation, he said finally. But technically, if your wife's name is on the deed, she has a right to access the home. What about the boys? I asked. They're my priority. I don't want them exposed to her behavior. That's something the courts will decide, he said. For now, my advice is to consult your lawyer and avoid any further escalation. The more evidence you have of her actions, the better your case will be. When I got home, Marcy's car was parked outside. She was sitting on the front steps, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. You're lucky I didn't press charges, she said as I walked past her. For what? Protecting my kids. I shot back. She stood up, blocking my path. You're not going to win this, Danny. You think you're some kind of hero, but you're just pathetic. The boys will see that eventually. I stared at her, my anger barely contained. I'm not doing this for me, Marcy. I'm doing this for them. And I'll do whatever it takes to make sure they're okay. Her smirk faltered for a moment, but she recovered quickly. We'll see about that. She stormed off to her car, leaving me standing there, my fists clenched so tightly they hurt. That night, I called Mark the lawyer, to update him. He listened carefully, then gave me some sobering advice. She's playing dirty, Danny, and she's not going to stop. You need to be ready for anything. I'm ready, I said, though the weight of his words made my stomach churn. Good, he said. Because this is just the beginning. The next day, I took Mark's advice and filed for a temporary custody order. It wasn't easy, knowing it would escalate things, but I couldn't let Marcy's chaos hurt the boys any more than it already had. When the papers were served, Marcy was furious. She confronted me in the driveway, her voice dripping with venom. You think a piece of paper is going to take my kids away from me? I stayed calm, remembering Mark's advice. This isn't about you, Marcy. It's about them. Her laughter was sharp and cold. You're going to regret this, Danny. I promise you. She stormed off again, slamming her car door so hard it echoed down the street. That night, for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't backing down anymore. A few days later, Jason came up to me after dinner, his face serious in a way I wasn't used to seeing on a 9-year-old. Dad, why is Mom so mad all the time? He asked. I froze for a moment, trying to find the right words. Sometimes grown-ups don't get along, buddy. But it's not your fault. None of this is. He nodded slowly, but I could see the worry in his eyes. Are you and Mom gonna split up? I wanted to tell him no, to protect him from the truth. But lying felt wrong. We're figuring things out. But no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you and Benny. That's never going to change. Jason hugged me tightly, and I held on a little longer than I probably needed to. That night, as I tucked the boys into bed, I realized how much this was affecting them, no matter how hard I tried to shield them. It gave me more resolve to see this through. For their sake, Marcy started pulling her own moves, trying to sway the boys. She began showering them with gifts, new video games for Jason, a giant Lego set for Benny. At first, they were thrilled, but I could see the confusion creeping in. Mom said she got this because she loves us more than anything, Jason said one evening, fiddling with his new controller. I forced a smile. That's nice of her, I said, keeping my anger in check. But inside, I knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to turn them against me, planting little seeds of doubt. It was subtle, but it stung. The next time I saw Marcy, I confronted her. Stop using the boys to play your games, I said, my voice low but firm. She smirked, unbothered. I'm their mother, Danny. They deserve to know who really cares about them. I clenched my fists but held back. She wanted a reaction, and I wasn't going to give her one. Instead, I walked away, determined to let my actions speak louder than her manipulations. One evening, after the boys were asleep, I sat in the quiet of the living room, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures of Marcy and me before everything fell apart, vacations, holidays, and random moments that seemed so perfect at the time. I couldn't help but wonder if I'd missed the signs, if there was something I could have done to prevent all of this. The doubt crept in, whispering that maybe I wasn't enough, just like she'd said. But then I looked at a photo of the boys, their smiles lighting up the screen. That was my focus now, not Marcy, not the past, but them. They were my reason to keep going. The next day, I called Mark. What are my chances of getting full custody? I asked, my voice steady but determined. It's not impossible, he said. But we'll need to prove that staying with you is in their best interest. Keep documenting everything, Danny. It'll make all the difference. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't about saving my marriage anymore. It was about saving my family. Week had passed since Marcy's last attempt to get back into the house. Things had been tense but manageable. I focused all my energy on the boys, trying to give them a sense of normalcy, while Marcy continued to hover on the edges of our lives like a storm cloud waiting to unleash its fury. One evening, just as the boys were finishing their homework, I heard a car door slam outside. I peeked through the curtains and saw Marcy stepping out of her car, this time with her sister Angela in tow. My stomach sank. Angela was always the one Marcy called when she wanted backup. I opened the door before they could knock. "What do you want, Marcy?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as I could. Angela stepped forward, her arms crossed. "We're not here to fight, Danny. Marcy just wants to see her kids. You can't keep her away like this." I sighed, stepping outside and closing the door behind me to keep the boys from hearing. "She's not locked out of their lives, Angela. She sees them during her time. But barging in here unannounced isn't helping anyone." Marcy huffed. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Danny. I'm their mother. I don't need an appointment to see my kids." I clenched my jaw, fighting to stay calm. "This isn't about you, Marcy. It's about what's best for them. And disrupting their routine every time you feel like making a scene, isn't it?" Angela scoffed. "You're the one making this a scene. You're so obsessed with control that you're willing to keep these boys from their mother? That's disgusting, Danny." Her words stung, but I didn't let it show. "No one's keeping them from her," I said firmly. "But I'll tell you what's disgusting, dragging them into this mess when they've already been through enough." Marcy's face twisted with anger. "Enough with the martyr act, Danny. You're not some hero. You're just bitter because you couldn't keep me happy, and now you're trying to punish me for it." I took a deep breath, staring at her as calmly as I could manage. "This isn't about punishing anyone, Marcy. This is about protecting the boys. That's my only priority." Her expression faltered for a moment, but Angela stepped in before she could respond. "Protecting them from what? Their own mother? You're unbelievable. Do you even hear yourself?" The door creaked open behind me, and Jason's voice cut through the tension. "Dad." I turned to see him standing there, his face full of confusion and worry. "What's going on?" I crouched down to his level, forcing a reassuring smile. "Nothing, buddy. Just talking with your mom and Aunt Angela. Why don't you and Benny go finish your homework, okay?" He hesitated, glancing between me and Marcy. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I said, gently guiding him back inside. "I'll be right there." When I turned back to Marcy and Angela, my patience was wearing thin. "You see what this does to them? They don't need this, Marcy. They need stability." Marcy's eyes narrowed. "And you think you're providing that? By locking me out of my own home and turning them against me?" "No one's turning them against you," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "But if they're starting to notice things, that's on you. You're the one making this harder than it needs to be." Angela shook her head, her tone dripping with condescension. "You're playing a dangerous game, Danny. Courts don't look kindly on fathers who alienate their kids from their mothers. You might want to rethink your strategy." I stared at her, biting back the anger that threatened to spill over. "The courts are going to see exactly what's been happening here. I've documented everything, Angela. Every text, every receipt, every time Marcy came here to cause a scene. If she wants to go to court, I'll be ready." For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt cross Angela's face. Marcy, however, wasn't fazed. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she sneered. "But this isn't over, Danny. Not by a long shot." She turned on her heel, Angela following close behind, and they got into the car. As they drove off, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Later that night, after the boys were in bed, I sat on the couch, replaying the encounter in my mind. The anger, the accusations, the way Jason had looked at me with those worried eyes, it all weighed on me like a ton of bricks. I called Mark to update him, and he listened patiently as I recounted the events. When I was done, he sighed. "Danny, you're handling this the best way you can, but it's going to get worse before it gets better. People like Marcy don't back down easily." "I know," I said quietly. "But I can't let her keep doing this. Not to the boys." "You're doing the right thing," he said. "Just stay the course. Document everything and keep your cool. The more you focus on the kids, the stronger your case will be." After I hung up, I sat there in the dark, staring at the family photo still hanging on the wall. It felt like a relic of another life, a reminder of what we used to be. But as much as I mourned what was lost, I knew I couldn't let Marcy's manipulations define our future. The boys deserved better, and I was going to do whatever it took to give it to them. The calm after Marcy and Angela's visit didn't last long. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, like the moments before a thunderstorm. Something was coming, I didn't know what, but it felt inevitable. A week later, it hit. It was late afternoon, and I was on the couch helping Benny build a Lego spaceship while Jason worked on a puzzle at the dining table. It was one of those rare moments of peace, the kind that reminded me why I was fighting so hard. Then the doorbell rang. Jason jumped up. "I'll get it." "Hold on," I said, setting Benny's Legos down and hurrying after him. By the time I reached the door, he'd already opened it. Standing on the porch was Marcy, and this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her were two police officers, their expressions neutral but firm. "Dad." Jason's voice wavered. I stepped forward, gently guiding him back inside. "Go to your room, Jason. Take Benny with you." "But..." "Now," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. Once the boys were upstairs, I turned to Marcy and the officers. "What's going on?" One of the officers spoke. "Mr. Miller, we're here to serve a court order. Your wife has filed for emergency custody of the children, citing concerns about their well-being." My stomach dropped. "What concerns?" Marcy stepped forward, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I didn't want it to come to this, Danny, but you've been unstable. The boys deserve a safe environment." "Unstable?" I said, my voice rising. "That's a lie and you know it." The officer raised a hand. "Sir, we're not here to debate. This is a legal matter. You'll have the opportunity to present your side in court." I could feel the room spinning. "You're taking them from me? Right now?" "Yes, sir," the officer said. "The court has granted your wife temporary custody pending further investigation." Marcy's smirk was barely hidden as she stepped past me into the house. "Boys? Mommy's here." I followed her, my chest heaving with anger and desperation. "You can't do this, Marcy. They're happy here. They're safe here." She didn't respond, instead heading upstairs. Moments later, I heard Jason's voice, confused and scared. "Mom? What are you doing here?" "Pack a bag, sweetie," she said, her voice sickeningly sweet. "You and Benny are coming with me for a little while." Jason appeared at the top of the stairs, his eyes wide and watery. "Dad? What's happening?" I swallowed hard, fighting the lump in my throat. "It's okay, Jason. Just do what she says for now. I'll see you soon." "No," he shouted, tears streaming down his face. "I don't want to go. I want to stay here." Marcy's voice turned sharp. "Jason, don't argue. Let's go." Benny appeared behind him, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. "Where are we going?" "It's just a little trip, sweetheart," Marcy said, brushing past me to guide them down the stairs. Jason tried to pull away. "No. I don't want to go." "Jason, listen to your mother." Marcy snapped, her patience fraying. I took a step forward, my fists clenched. "Don't yell at him." The officers stepped between us, their hands resting on their belts. "Sir, you need to calm down." I froze, realizing that any wrong move could make this worse. "Jason," I said softly, my voice shaking. "It's okay. Just go with her for now. I'll fix this, I promise." His lip quivered as he stared at me, his trust crumbling. "You said you'd keep us safe." Those words broke me. Minutes later, they were gone. I stood in the empty house, the silence deafening. Their toys were still scattered on the floor, their laughter replaced by a hollow ache in my chest. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, replaying every moment of the past few months. I had fought so hard, tried to stay strong for them, and it still wasn't enough. The next day, I called Mark to update him. He was sympathetic, but honest. "This doesn't look good, Danny. Emergency custody orders are hard to overturn unless you can prove her claims are false. Do you have any evidence?" "I have everything," I said, my voice hoarse. "Then we'll fight this," he said. "But you need to be prepared, it's going to be a long battle." I hung up, the weight of his words pressing down on me. Long battle or not, I wasn't sure I had anything left to give. Weeks passed, each one harder than the last. I saw the boys during supervised visits, their confusion and sadness cutting deeper every time. Jason barely spoke, his trust in me clearly shattered. Benny clung to me during every visit, crying when it was time to leave. Marcy, meanwhile, played the role of the perfect mother, smiling and doting whenever the boys were around. But when they weren't looking, she would smirk at me, her eyes full of triumph. By the time our first court hearing rolled around, I was a shell of the person I used to be. I had my evidence, my lawyer, and the truth on my side, but none of it seemed to matter. The judge ruled to maintain Marcy's temporary custody until a full investigation could be completed. The boys would stay with her, and I would continue to have limited visitation. As I left the courthouse that day, the weight of it all finally crushed me. Marcy had won. Maybe not forever, but for now, and now was all that mattered to my boys. I sat in my car, staring at the dashboard, feeling like I had failed them in the worst way possible. The storm had come, and it had destroyed everything.